You've heard the stories, haven't you?
Yeah.
You know, the brilliant innovators, the visionary leaders, those big eureka moments that just, boom, changed the world. It's a narrative we all kind of love.
It is compelling.
But what if that popular image of startup success, you know, all genius, maybe some magic, and just relentless hard work, what if that's only half the story? And what if the less glamorous part, the methodical, almost scientific part, is actually the real key to unlocking success? And maybe, just maybe, avoiding colossal waste.
It's such a powerful question because that traditional path, while it looks inspiring, it often leads to incredible amounts of waste.
Right.
We're talking about wasting our civilization's most precious resource, people's time, their passion, their skill, and all by building the wrong things efficiently.
Loading the wrong things efficiently. That's stark.
Imagine perfectly executing a plan, hitting all your milestones, only to realize, oops, nobody actually wanted what you built. That's the exact problem this whole approach tackles head on.
And that's why today we're doing a deep dive into Eric Ries's groundbreaking book, The Lean Startup. And this isn't just for, you know, Silicon Valley techies tinkering in garages. Not at all. It's presented as a really revolutionary approach to innovation, to management, that could transform virtually anything we do.
Absolutely. From, say, pioneering government programs to fostering new ideas inside huge established corporations, it's got broad applicability.
So our mission today really is to unpack how the lean startup gives us a kind of scientific process, a way to quickly learn what works and discard what doesn't.
Yeah, cutting down on that wasted effort and dramatically boosting the chances of success, especially when you're dealing with, extreme uncertainty, which is what startups face.
Exactly. So we'll explore the core principles, look at some fascinating real-world examples, and, yes, some surprising failures, too, and really figure out how it helps us avoid building something nobody wants.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so right out of the gate, when most people hear startup, they picture like a small, nimble tech company, right?
Usually, yeah.
But Ries offers a much broader and I think a more insightful definition. It really expands who an entrepreneur truly is. What's his take?
Well, Ries defines a startup not just by size, but as a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
A human institution under extreme uncertainty.
And what's really key there is that definition means entrepreneurs are everywhere. You don't need to be in a garage. You could be an intrapreneur, someone inside a huge company like Intuit trying to build something totally new.
Or maybe someone launching a new program in a nonprofit even.
Exactly. It could be anywhere. There's that high level of uncertainty about the product, the customer, the market.
That makes so much sense. It shifts the focus from like company size to the fundamental challenge, operating when you don't have all the answers.
Precisely.
I remember reading about this guy, Mark, a general manager at some big company. He had the vision, a great team. He was willing to take risks.
All the ingredients, seemingly.
Right. But he felt like he had, and I think this is a quote, all the raw materials. But where's the fire? He was missing the process for innovation.
The process. That's crucial.
It's not just about founders. It's a mindset. It's a method that anyone creating something new under uncertainty can actually adopt.
That's it, exactly. And that leads us straight into the 5 core principles of the lean startup. Should we walk through those?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first, as we just discussed, entrepreneurs are everywhere. Doesn't matter the company size, sector, industry. If you're creating something new under uncertainty, this applies.
Got it. Everywhere.
Second, entrepreneurship is management. But, and this is key, it's a new kind of management. It's tailored specifically for navigating that uncertainty and fostering future growth. It's not the same playbook you use for managing a stable, predictable business.
Okay, different kind of management. What's third?
Third is validated learning. And you mentioned this earlier, it really feels like the heart of it.
It does. Why is learning, specifically validated learning, so critical? Like beyond just making stuff or hitting revenue targets.
It's critical because fundamentally, startups exist not just to make things or even just make money initially. They exist to learn how to build a sustainable business.
Learn how to build it.
Yes. And that learning has to be, scientific. Grounded in evidence. You do it through frequent, deliberate experiments.
Yeah.
It's about rigorously testing your assumptions with real data from real customers, not just, hoping your brilliant idea works out.
Right, not just relying on intuition alone.
Exactly. Which brings us nicely to the 4th principle, which is the core feedback loop. Build, measure, learn.
The famous loop.
The famous loop. You turn ideas into products, often very simple products, MVPs we'll get to.
Yeah.
Then you measure how customers actually respond quantitatively, and based on that learning, you decide whether to pivot, change direction, or persevere, keep going.
That continuous steering seems fundamental.
It is. And finally, the fifth principle. Innovation accounting. This is a completely new way to measure progress for startups. It focuses on, as Ries puts it, the boring stuff.
The boring stuff.
Yeah. Milestones, prioritization, metrics. But it's accounting for learning, not just for dollars in the bank or features shipped. It's how you know if you're actually making progress towards a sustainable business model or just, spinning your wheels productively.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about tracking learning milestones. So if this framework gives a clearer path, why do startups still fail so often? What are those traditional traps that derail so many?
Well, one huge one is what Ries calls the allure of a good plan.
The allure of a good plan. Sounds nice.
It does sound nice. And traditional planning works beautifully in stable, predictable environments. If you're building a bridge, you need a detailed plan. But startups face way too much uncertainty. They often don't even know who their customer really is or exactly what the product should do. Trying to apply those detailed, long-term plans, it's like trying to navigate a maze blindfolded, using a map of a different building. Tiny errors in your initial assumptions get magnified hugely down the line.
Because you're trying to predict things that are fundamentally unpredictable at that stage.
Exactly. Then, on the complete flip side, you have the just do it school of thought.
Ah, yes, the chaos approach.
Right, which basically says management is the problem, planning is bad, let's just wing it.
Right.
But abandoning all management and structure for pure improvisation, that doesn't work either. It often leads to a different kind of failure, burnout, wasted effort, maybe building something cool, but not a business.
So too much planning is bad, but no planning is also bad.
Pretty much. The core problem, as we touched on earlier, is this massive waste. We waste our civilization's most precious resource, the time, passion, and skill of its people, by building the wrong things, even if we build them efficiently.
That phrase again, it's haunting.
It is. We might build a product perfectly, on time, on budget, only to find out nobody actually wants it. That's the real tragedy, and it often stems from a fear of failure, or maybe just a resistance to admitting how much we don't know up front. We're often more comfortable doing than we are learning.
Okay, so to really get our heads around the power of this lean startup approach, I think we need to go back to the origin story. It came from Eric Ries' own experiences, right? Specifically with a company called IMVU.
Yes, absolutely. This wasn't just theory dreamed up in an ivory tower. It was forged in the fires of, near failure.
Tell us about it.
So Eric Ries was a co-founder and the CTO of IMVU, which was founded back in 2004. And context here is important. He'd been through a pretty public failure with a previous company, so their credibility wasn't exactly high starting out.
Okay, pressure's on.
Big time. And they had this massive vision to change how people communicate online using 3D avatars. This was before James Cameron's Avatar movie made that cool, remember?
Right, this is early days for that idea.
Very early. They envisioned user-generated content, online commerce, micropayments, all running smoothly on pretty much any PC. Hugely ambitious.
Incredibly ambitious for 2004. So how did they try to tackle that enormous vision? What was the initial product strategy?
Their specific first product idea was an instant messaging IM add-on. The idea was it would plug into existing popular IM networks like AIM or MSN Messenger back then.
Piggyback on existing networks for growth.
That was the plan. Aim for viral growth that way. But here's the kicker, and where the lean thinking starts to emerge, even if painfully. They built what they called a minimum viable product, or MVP.
Okay, the MVP.
But this MVP was, in Ries' own words, terrible, full of bugs and crash your computer, yes, really stability problems.
Wow. Okay, not exactly polished.
Not even close. They shipped it way before it's ready, deliberately. And get this, they charged money for it right from day one.
They charged for the terrible, buggy product.
Ouch.
I can only imagine the team's anxiety. They must have been thinking, here we go again, headline, inept entrepreneurs build dreadful product.
Totally. The fear was immense. They worried about tarnishing their already fragile reputations. So what happened when they launched this intentionally imperfect paid product?
Yeah, what happened? Please don't say crickets.
Well, the painful reality was pretty much crickets. Nothing happened. Almost nobody even tried it, let alone paid for it. Their initial revenue goal for the first month was a modest $300. They barely scraped it together, and Ries admits many friends and family members were asked, begged,
Oh man, that's tough.
and revenue just plateaued around $500 a month, stuck. And this was despite the team working like crazy, making continuous product improvements, shipping updates daily. But customer behavior just wasn't changing. The core metrics weren't moving.
This is where those customer interviews must have become absolutely critical, right? Those moments where you have to confront your beautiful theory with messy reality.
Exactly, the deal breaker moments. They started bringing teenagers, their target users, into the office, and they quickly found out these kids didn't even understand what an IM add-on was as a product category. It just didn't compute.
The basic concept was confusing.
Yeah. And then came this classic quote, and this is such a huge insight for anyone building social products. The teenagers flat out refused to invite their friends. They said things like, "What are they going to think of me? If it sucks, they're going to think I suck, right?"
Whoa. That kills the viral growth engine dead right there.
Instantly. It highlighted a fundamental social barrier, a risk to the user's reputation that the team hadn't even considered.
And then they made that single-player mode mistake. That really shows how literally listening to feedback can sometimes mislead you.
It's a classic trap. Customers said, "I want to use it by myself," so they built features for solo use. But they missed the underlying question. What is the point of a single-player experience for a social product? They were essentially building something people didn't want for its core intended purpose.
So they were kind of lost. How did they find their way out?
The breakthrough came, almost accidentally, with a feature called Chat Now. It randomly matched users with each other for brief chats.
Oh, like a proto-chat roulette kind of thing.
Sort of, yeah. And users suddenly went, "Oh, this is fun." That unexpected positive reaction led to another critical insight, the stranger on my AIM buddy list moment. Customers loved meeting new people via Chat Now, but they absolutely refused to add these strangers to their existing AIM or MSM buddy lists. They didn't want to pollute their trusted, curated social circle with unvetted randoms.
So they wanted new connections, but in a separate space.
Exactly. So the hard-won lesson, after all that effort, all his daily builds, was that the IM add-on concept was fundamentally flawed. Customers didn't want an add-on to their existing networks. They wanted a standalone IM network specifically designed for making new friends. They were actually open to installing a whole new IM program, which was a massive strategic shift.
Wow. That's a huge pivot based on that learning.
Huge. And this, for Ries, was the biggest waste of all. Even though they were using cutting-edge agile development methods, which are all about efficiency and iteration.
They were efficiently building the wrong thing.
Precisely. They built a product customers simply refused to use in the intended way. And the profound realization was this. True value in a startup isn't just making things efficiently. It's validated learning about how to build a sustainable business. That learning is the progress.
That shift from focusing on building features to validating assumptions seems absolutely key.
It's the core transformation.
Okay, so taking all that painful, hard-won learning, how does the lean startup method actually work in practice? Let's start with that validated learning idea and the build, measure, learn loop. It sounds simple on the surface, but applying it, that seems like the tricky part.
It does sound simple, but you're right. The discipline is hard. The core idea is that startup success isn't about having a perfect crystal ball and executing a flawless plan. It's about systematically testing each part of your vision, your business plan.
Turning assumptions into testable hypotheses.
Exactly. And as Ries says, if you cannot fail, you cannot learn. Failure in this context isn't catastrophic. It's data. It's learning what doesn't work so you can find what does. The mantra is, think big. Have a grand vision, but start small. Test the riskiest assumptions first with the smallest possible experiment.
And the Zappos story is such a great example of this, isn't it? Founder Nick Swinmurn had this huge vision, a massive online shoe store. But instead of, building giant warehouses and spending millions up front, what did he do?
He did something brilliantly lean. He went to local shoe stores, took pictures of their inventory, put those pictures up on a basic website. When someone actually ordered a pair online, he'd go back to the store, buy the shoes, and ship them himself.
So like a completely manual back end at first.
Totally manual. That was his MVP. It tested the most critical assumption, will people actually buy shoes online without trying them on? And crucially, it allowed him to learn directly about customer interactions, payments, returns, support all the messy details without sinking huge capital.
And the result eventually was Amazon buying Zappos for, over $1 billion?
$1.2 billion. Not bad for starting with photos from the local mall. And it's not just tech startups. Even something like an internal corporate initiative, like that HP volunteering program mentioned in the book, that's effectively a startup facing extreme uncertainty.
How so?
Well, Caroline's project to boost skilled employee volunteering, it had untested assumptions. Are employees motivated? Will they use their specific skills? Are managers supportive? Those are all hypotheses you can test with small targeted experiments before rolling out a massive program.
Right. You don't need to launch the whole thing to learn.
Yeah.
So let's dig deeper into that MVP, the minimum viable product. It's a term everyone throws around now, but it often gets misunderstood. What's the key to getting an MVP right? It's not just about building the smallest possible thing, is it?
No, definitely not just the smallest or the cheapest or even the quickest thing to build in isolation. The definition is crucial. It's the fastest way to get through the bait, measure, learn feedback loop with the minimum amount of effort.
Fastest way through the loop. Okay.
The focus is on speed of learning, not just speed of coding. It might not be polished. It might only have one key feature. Its primary purpose is to start the process of learning, not to be the final product.
And who is it really for? It's not for the mass market initially, right?
No, absolutely not. It primarily serves the early adopters. Those are the visionary customers, the ones who feel the pain point most acutely. They're willing to use their imagination to fill in what a product is missing and tolerate flaws because they see the potential value, or they want the competitive advantage of being first. They're essentially your partners in the learning process.
Like co-developers almost.
In a way, yes. They provide the crucial early feedback.
Okay, so let's look at some examples. Groupon is fascinating. It started as something called The Point, a platform for collective activism, which failed.
Right. The initial vision didn't pan out.
But their MVP for what became Groupon was incredibly simple. Just the basic WordPress blog, and they manually emailed PDFs for a 2-for-1 pizza deal to, 20 people in their building.
Super lo-fi. But it tested the core mechanic. Will people buy a voucher for a future discount if enough others also commit?
And that incredibly humble start became, for a while, the fastest company ever to reach $1 billion in sales. Amazing.
It really is. Or think about Dropbox. File synchronization was a problem, but as Ries points out, it was a problem most people didn't know they had back then. It was hard to explain, hard to demo without a working product.
So how did Drew Houston, the founder, create an MVP for something hard to demonstrate?
He couldn't easily show a working prototype that captured the magic, so he made a video. A simple screen recording showing the product working seamlessly, narrating the benefits. But crucially, he filled it with in-jokes and references targeted specifically at the early adopter tech community on sites like Dig and Reddit.
Ah, so the video itself was the MVP, aimed at validating interest from the right audience.
Exactly. It demonstrated the vision and the value proposition effectively enough to gauge demand. And the result? Their beta waiting list exploded. From 5,000 to 75,000 people, literally overnight, just from that video. No complex code needed for that initial validation.
That's brilliant. It really broadens the definition of product.
Yeah.
What about MVPs that involve more human effort up front?
Yeah, there are different types. The concierge MVP is a great example. Look at Food on the Table, or FOTT. Their vision was a service providing customized weekly meal plans and grocery lists.
Sounds complex to automate.
Very. So instead of building software first, the CEO and VP personally visited one single customer each week. They'd plan meals, create the shopping list by hand, deliver it, and collect $9.95.
Wow. Talk about high touch. And totally unscalable?
Completely unscalable. But it wasn't about scale at that point. This super inefficient concierge service was purely a learning activity. It let them test assumptions. Would someone pay? What kind of recipes did they want? How did they actually shop? They learned all that before writing a line of code to automate it.
So the manual work was the product development, in a sense.
It was the learning engine.
Yeah.
Then there's the Wizard of Oz MVP.
Wizard of Oz, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Haha, exactly. This is where you create the illusion of a fully automated system, but humans are actually doing the work behind the scenes. Aardvark is a good example. They wanted to build a service to answer subjective questions like, what's a good bar near my office?
Tricky for AI back then.
Very. So founders Max and Damon tested 6 different prototypes over 6 months. And for much of that time, they used humans to replicate the back end as much as possible. When a question came in, a team member would figure out the best answer and send it back, making it look automated.
So they could test the user interface and the types of questions people asked without needing perfect AI from day one.
Precisely. It let them rapidly learn what users valued and refine the experience based on real interactions before investing heavily in the complex back-end technology. And Aardvark was eventually acquired by Google for around $50 million.
These examples really challenge the traditional notion of what a product is in the early stages. But it brings up that quality question again. If you're shipping something terrible like early IMVU or something manual like FOT, doesn't that risk your brand? How do you manage perceptions of quality?
It's a valid concern, but the lean startup perspective flips the definition of quality. Ries argues, if we do not know who the customer is, we do not know what quality is.
Say more about that.
Quality isn't just about lack of bugs or polish. It's about delivering value to the target customer. For early adopters, value might be speed or access to a new capability, even if it's rough. Remember IMVU's buggy avatars that could teleport instantly?
Yeah.
Technically low quality, lots of visual glitches, but early users loved them because they were fast and fun for quick chats, which was the core value they sought at that stage. Polished, realistic walking animation would have been slower and, for them, lower quality in that specific context.
So quality is relative to the learning goal on the user segment.
Exactly. The rule becomes, remove any feature, process, or effort that does not contribute directly to the learning you seek. Build just enough to test your core hypothesis for the current stage of the build, measure, learn loop. Ruthless prioritization focused on learning.
But surely there are roadblocks, right? You mentioned fear before. What about, say, legal stuff like patents? Or competitors seeing your MVP? Or just team morale when an experiment yields bad news?
Absolutely. Those are real speed bumps. Legal issues, like needing to file patents before revealing too much, can sometimes constrain the MVP process. Fear of competitors is huge, but Ries argues it's often overblown.
Why overblown?
Because most established companies are already drowning in good ideas they can't execute. If a competitor can see your simple MVP and instantly outbuild and outmarket you, you probably have bigger problems anyway. The real competitive advantage isn't the idea, it's the speed of learning and iteration. Learn faster than anyone else.
Okay, focus on learning speed as the defense.
Right. And as for branding risks and morale, yes, MVPs can produce bad news. Experiments can fail. Features might be unpopular. That can hurt morale or make teams defensive.
So how do you counter that?
It requires strong leadership and a culture shift. You have to frame these outcomes not as failures, but as valuable learning. Commit to iteration. Celebrate the learning, even when it's uncomfortable. That requires psychological safety and a clear understanding across the team that the goal is learning, not just immediate success metrics.
Okay, so you run your MVP, you gather data, which leads us naturally to innovation accounting. How do you measure real progress in a startup when, traditional profit and loss statements don't tell the early story? It sounds like the key is avoiding those vanity metrics.
That's exactly right. Innovation accounting is designed specifically for the uncertainty of startups. It works in roughly 3 steps, as we touched on.
Right. Baseline, tune, pivot, persevere.
Yep. First, use your MVP to establish a baseline. Get real, hard data on how customers are behaving right now. Conversion rates, retention rates, usage patterns, not just guesses.
Concrete numbers.
Concrete, actionable numbers. Second, you tune the engine. You run specific experiments, A/B tests, new features, different messaging designed explicitly to improve those baseline metrics. Not just random activity, but targeted efforts to move the needle on key indicators.
And then the big decision.
And third, after you've run experiments and optimized as much as seems possible, you look at the data honestly and decide, are we making enough progress towards a sustainable business? If yes, persevere. If no, despite our best efforts, it's time to pivot.
And avoiding vanity metrics is critical to making that decision correctly.
Absolutely critical. Because vanity metrics can mask a lack of real progress.
So remind us, what's the difference again? Vanity versus actionable. I think we all fall for vanity metrics sometimes.
Oh, easily done. Vanity metrics are things like total registered users, total website hits, total downloads. They almost always go up and to the right, which feels great.
Makes for nice charts and presentations.
Exactly. They make everyone feel good. But they often don't correlate with actual business health. And crucially, they don't tell you why things are happening. They can create success theater where everyone congratulates themselves while the underlying business model might be broken. You might think your marketing campaign drove up users, but maybe it was just seasonality.
Right. No clear cause and effect.
Whereas actionable metrics link directly to specific customer behaviors and show cause and effect. Things like conversion rates, what percentage of visitors sign up. active user rates, retention cohorts, how many users from January are still active in March, revenue per customer. These metrics help you understand if your changes are working and why.
Like the IMVU example again. They made tons of product improvements, thousands of changes.
Daily
And
improvements.
their total user numbers were probably going up, looking good on a chart.
Yep, vanity metric rising.
But the actionable metric, the percentage of new customers who actually paid money, stayed stubbornly flat at 1% for months.
Flatlined. That was the acid test of real numbers. That told them something was fundamentally wrong with their approach, despite all the activity. That actionable metric forced them to confront reality. They eventually learned how to improve that conversion rate, even testing advertising effectively on just $5 a day.
$5 a day.
Wow.
And Grokkit, the online test prep company, had a similar issue.
Yeah, Grokkit's another great case study. They were super disciplined with agile development, shipping features constantly, getting lots of positive anecdotal feedback, but growth was stagnant.
Why? What were they measuring?
They were drowning in vanity metrics. Total customers signed up, total number of questions answered, looked busy, looked productive, but didn't translate to sustainable growth.
So what was the fix?
They shifted focus to actionable metrics and started using split testing or A/B testing rigorously. They'd show different versions of a feature or page to different users and measure the impact on specific behaviors like engagement or conversion.
And what did they learn?
Some surprising things. They discovered that adding fancy social features didn't actually increase student engagement, despite expectations. But a simpler solo studying mode with game-like levels did. They also tested a lazy registration feature, letting users try before signing up, generally considered a best practice.
Yeah.
For them, it had zero impact on sign-up conversion. That suggested their bottleneck wasn't the registration friction. It was likely their marketing or initial value proposition. That learning allowed them to refocus their efforts more effectively.
It sounds like A/B testing is crucial for this.
It's a core tool for validated learning, yes. And Grokkit also adopted Kanban, a visual workflow management system. Crucially, they changed their definition of done for a feature or story. It wasn't just coded and shipped, it was validated, meaning they actually ran an experiment to know if building it was a good idea in the first place.
That's a huge shift. From did we build it to did building it work?
Massive shift. Productivity changed from just outputting features to generating validated learning about what actually drives growth.
So to make metrics useful, Ries talks about the 3 A's. What are they?
Right. For metrics to drive good decisions, they need to be actionable, accessible, and auditable.
Okay, break those down. Actionable.
Actionable means the metric shows clear cause and effect. You run an experiment, and the metric changes in a way you can understand. It helps you decide what to do next.
Accessible.
Accessible means everyone involved can easily understand and access the data. Use simple, tangible units like people visiting the website, not obscure hits. Make the reports widely available, maybe through simple dashboards or daily emails like Grokkit did. Don't hoard the data.
And auditable.
Auditable means you can basically check the data as homework. You need to be able to ensure the reports are consistent with the real underlying customer behavior. Can you talk to actual customers and see if their experience matches what the numbers say? It prevents metrics from becoming detached from reality.
Actionable, accessible, auditable. Got it. Okay, so you've got your MVP, you're measuring with actionable metrics.
Yeah.
And the data comes back showing things aren't working as hoped, even after tuning the engine. That brings us to what feels like the hardest part, the art of the pivot.
Definitely one of the most difficult, gut-wrenching decisions an entrepreneur or innovator has to make.
Or the equally tough decision to persevere when things look bleak, but the data suggests you're on track. It's not there yet.
Exactly. And Ries notes that, in hindsight, many entrepreneurs wish they had pivoted sooner. There's often a strong emotional attachment to the original vision, making it hard to let go even when the evidence is clear.
So what is a pivot, exactly? It's not just giving up, right?
No, not at all. A pivot isn't just a random change or an admission of failure. It's a structured course correction. It's specifically designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product, the strategy, the growth engine. It's essentially saying, our initial hypothesis was wrong, here's a new one, and here's the new MVP we'll use to test it.
A new hypothesis requiring a new experiment.
Precisely. It requires courage to face those unpleasant truths the data reveals, and to admit, okay, maybe my brilliant idea needs a major tweak.
Let's look at Vodism. David Benetti wanted to boost civic participation. His initial MVP was a social network for verified voters.
Right. Connect voters with each other.
And it had some success, right? Some early adopters really liked it.
Moderate success, yeah. Passionate early users. But the key growth metrics, how many users stuck around, how many referred others, those numbers were just too low. Even after they tried optimizing the product, the engine wasn't firing properly.
So what was the pivot?
He made what Ries calls a zoom-in pivot. He took one feature of the original platform, the ability to contact elected officials, and made that the entire product. It became a social lobbying platform called @2gov, translating digital messages into actual paper letters sent to politicians.
Okay, focusing on one specific function. Did that work?
That new MVP, built relatively quickly, showed dramatically better engagement and referral rates. People were using it, but still very few were willing to pay for it. So another hypothesis needed testing.
Leading to another pivot.
Yep. This time, a customer segment pivot. They realized maybe individual consumers weren't the right target. They shifted focus to selling the lobbying tool to large organizations, businesses, unions, nonprofits who would pay to mobilize their members, going B2B.
Okay, changing the who.
And even that wasn't the end. They eventually executed a platform pivot, creating a self-serve platform, kind of like Google AdWords, but for political campaigns, allowing anyone to run their own social lobbying efforts. And that version finally led to a working, scalable growth model.
Wow, that's a series of pivots. Zoom in, then customer segment, then platform.
Exactly. And what's really striking in the Vodafone story is the acceleration of the MVPs. The first one took about 8 months to build and test. The next pivot's MVP took 4 months, then 3 months, then just 1 month.
Why did it get faster?
Because the validated learning from each cycle wasn't lost. Each pivot built on the knowledge gained before it, allowing them to formulate and test the next hypothesis much more quickly and efficiently. It shows how learning actually compounds and builds momentum, builds speed.
That's a powerful demonstration. Any other pivot examples?
Wealthfront is another good one. They started off as Kaching, which was basically a fantasy league for amateur investors.
Like fantasy football, but for stocks.
Pretty much. And they had huge initial traction with gamers, 450,000 users. Looked amazing on paper.
Vanity metric alert.
Big time vanity metric alert. When they dug into the data, they found only about 7 managers on the platform actually demonstrated real, statistically significant investing skill. And almost 0 users were converting into paying customers based on following these managers. The core business model wasn't working.
So what was their pivot?
They pivoted completely away from the gaming social investing model and towards direct wealth management services using software and algorithms. A totally different business based on the hard data from their failed first attempt.
Even IMVU, the origin story, had later pivots, right? They didn't just get it right after the first big shift.
That's a crucial point. Success doesn't mean you stop learning or pivoting. IMVU, after its initial success with the standalone network and micropayments, actually fell into a trap later on. They started ignoring their own lean principles.
How so?
They missed recognizing the need for a customer segment pivot. Their early adopters loved the quirky, fast avatars and were tech-savvy. But as they tried to go mainstream, those new customers had very different demands. Higher quality, more ease of use, better integration. IMVU was slow to adapt because they weren't rigorously applying build, measure, learn to this new customer segment.
So they needed to relearn for the mainstream market.
Exactly. It led to what Ries called a second founding, involving a major product overhaul and rethinking their approach. But it could have happened much sooner and less painfully if they'd kept the lean learning cycles going strong.
It shows that pivoting isn't a one-time fix. So Ries actually catalogs different types of pivots, doesn't he? We mentioned zoom in, customer segment, platform.
Yeah, there's a whole list. Things like zoom out pivot, where a single feature becomes the whole product, the opposite of zoom in. Business architecture pivot, like going from high margin, low volume to low margin, high volume. Think Dell versus Apple. Value capture pivot, changing how you make money. Engine of growth pivots, switching focus from, say, viral to paid growth. Technology pivot, achieving the same solution with completely different tech.
It's a toolbox of strategic shifts.
It is. And the key is that each pivot is treated as a new strategic hypothesis, which then needs to be tested systematically with a new MVP and actionable metrics. It's not throwing darts. It's a disciplined exploration of alternatives.
And these pivots are ultimately trying to find or optimize what Ries calls the engines of growth. right? The mechanisms that actually drive sustainable growth over time.
Precisely. Sustainable growth isn't just a one-off marketing blast, it's structural. At its core, it means new customers come from the actions of past customers.
How does that work? What are the forms it takes?
It could be simple word of mouth. It could be built into the product's use, like seeing friends using it. It could be funded by past revenue, like paid advertising. Or it could be repeat purchases or usage by existing satisfied customers. The key is that the system generates its own fuel for growth.
Okay, and Riz identifies 3 primary engines that startups typically rely on. First is the sticky engine. What's that about?
The sticky engine focuses on customer retention. You aim to attract customers and then keep them for a very long time with a very low churn rate. Think about enterprise software or database technology. Once a company builds its systems on your platform, it's incredibly difficult and costly for them to switch.
High switching costs create stickiness.
Exactly. If your rate of new customer acquisition is consistently higher than your churn rate, the product will grow steadily over time. The focus is all on engagement and minimizing churn.
Makes sense. What's the second engine?
The second is the viral engine. This is where the product itself is designed to spread rapidly from user to user, almost like a virus.
The Hotmail example is classic here.
The absolute classic. Just adding that simple line, P.S., get your free email at Hotmail, to the footer of every single email sent through their system. Each user became an advertisement. Within 18 months, they had 12 million subscribers. Incredible viral loop.
And this is measured by the viral coefficient, right? The K factor.
Yep, the K factor. It measures, on average, how many new customers each existing customer brings in. If K is greater than 1.0, each customer brings more than one new one, you get exponential growth. Viral products are often free, at least initially, to remove any friction to spreading.
Okay. Sticky, viral. What's the third engine?
The third is the paid engine of growth. This is more straightforward in concept. You pay money to acquire customers through advertising, sales teams, etc., and you make that sustainable if the revenue you generate from each customer over their lifetime is greater than the cost to acquire them.
So customer lifetime value, LTV, needs to be greater than cost per acquisition, CPA.
LTV, CPA. That's the magic formula for the paid engine. If you can maintain that positive margin, you can reinvest the profits from existing customers into acquiring more customers, creating a virtuous cycle. You can essentially buy growth.
And IMVU used this one effectively.
Yes, especially early on. They deliberately targeted customer segments that bigger competitors often overlooked, like teenagers, international users, lower income groups, because they could acquire them more cheaply. And they got very good at monetizing these users through micropayments for virtual goods. This allowed them to afford paying for customer acquisition where others couldn't, letting them outbid competitors for attention.
So they found an arbitrage opportunity in the paid acquisition market.
Pretty much. And what's really insightful about these engines is how they put the fuzzy concept of product market fit onto a more rigorous quantitative footing. Instead of just saying, we feel like we have product market fit, you can define it by the metrics of your chosen engine. Are your sticky metrics, retention, engagement, strong? Is your viral coefficient above 1? Is your LTV comfortably above CPA? Those numbers tell you if you've truly found fit and have a sustainable growth model. And typically, Ries advises, startups should focus on mastering one engine at a time before trying to layer on others.
Got it. Focus is key. Okay, shifting gears slightly. We've talked a lot about startups, but how do these ideas apply inside larger established organizations? How do you adapt a big company for this kind of continuous innovation? And is there a risk of going too fast with all this experimentation?
That's a great question about speed, and the book is very clear. You cannot sacrifice quality for speed in the long run. Shipping lots of low-quality experiments full of defects actually slows you down because you spend all your time fixing things or dealing with confused customers.
It creates drag.
Exactly. It's the paradox beautifully illustrated by the Toyota production system and the and-on cord.
The and-on cord.
Yeah. On the Toyota assembly line, any worker could pull a cord, the and-on cord, to stop the entire production line if they saw a defect or a problem.
Stop the whole line. That sounds incredibly inefficient.
It sounds inefficient in the moment, but the philosophy is stop production so that production never has to stop. By fixing the root cause of the problem immediately, right when it's discovered, you prevent that defect from multiplying downstream and causing much bigger delays or recalls later. That relentless focus on immediate quality improvement ultimately creates more speed and efficiency overall.
So addressing problems at the source prevents bigger issues. This sounds related to the 5 whys technique.
Very much so. The 5 whys is another powerful tool borrowed from Toyota for root cause analysis. When a problem occurs, you don't just fix the symptom, you ask why, repeatedly, usually about 5 times, to dig down to the fundamental process or human issue.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say a server failed. Why? Because a critical subsystem overloaded? Why? Because it was configured incorrectly? Why? Because the engineer who set it up wasn't properly trained on the new procedure? Why? Because their manager was too busy with other crises to ensure the training happened.
So it often traces back to a human or process issue, not just a technical glitch.
Often, yes. And the goal isn't to find someone to blame, that's the 5 blames, which is counterproductive. The goal is to identify the systemic weakness so you can fix that. And it requires what Ries calls proportional investment in prevention. Small fix for a minor one-off issue. Bigger investment in training or process change for a recurring or painful problem.
And this needs buy-in from the top,
Right,
to overcome that blame culture.
Absolutely. Executive leadership has to champion this culture of identifying and fixing systemic issues, not just pointing fingers.
The QuickBooks example from Intuit seems like a perfect case study of a large company making this kind of shift. They had this traditional big batch annual release cycle for their software.
Yeah, mission-critical software, huge releases, lots of pressure. And they had this one beta release that was technically near flawless, passed all the engineering tests.
Right.
But when real customers used it, the feedback was terrible. They hated it. It didn't solve their problems effectively. And because of their long release cycle, it took 9 months to fix the issues and get an improved version out.
9 months. That's an eternity in software.
Exactly. Ries calls it a classic case of achieving failure, successfully executing a flawed plan. They built the wrong thing perfectly.
So how did QuickBooks change?
They fundamentally shifted their approach, inspired by lean principles. They broke down the huge teams into smaller, cross-functional units responsible for specific customer outcomes. They adopted much shorter development cycles. And crucially, they found ways to get faster, more direct customer feedback integrated into the process.
What was a key innovation there for feedback?
A big one was developing a sophisticated virtualization system. This allowed them to run multiple different versions of QuickBooks safely on a single customer's computer using their live data. This meant they could test new features or workflows with small batches of real customers in their real context, getting immediate, high-quality feedback before a wide release.
So enabling safe, small batch experiments, even with complex live data.
Exactly. It was a huge investment in infrastructure and process, but it allowed them to move from ponderous annual releases to much faster quarterly releases, embedding learning directly into their development rhythm.
So beyond specific processes like 5 whys or small batches, what kind of broader organizational structures help foster this continuous innovation inside a bigger company? How do you create a space where these entrepreneurs can actually succeed?
Ries outlines 3 key structural attributes that these internal innovation teams need. First, they need scarce but secure resources.
Scarce but secure, meaning
A relatively small, fixed budget, but one they can count on. It won't just be randomly cut halfway through an experiment if quarterly numbers dip elsewhere in the company. The scarcity forces discipline and focus, while the security allows them to actually run the experiments needed for learning.
Okay, stable funding, even if limited. What's second?
Second is independent authority to develop and test their ideas. They need autonomy, the ability to run their experiments and make decisions without getting constantly second-guessed or micromanaged by layers of corporate bureaucracy whose incentives might be tied to protecting the existing business, like that island of freedom SnapTax had within Intuit.
Shielded from internal politics somewhat.
Ideally, yes. And third, the team members need a personal stake in the outcome. This could be financial through bonuses or equity tied to the venture's success, or it could be significant career recognition and credit for the innovation. There needs to be a strong incentive aligned with the success of the new venture, not just with maintaining the status quo.
Resources, authority, and a stake in the outcome. Makes sense. And there's this concept of the innovation sandbox to help manage this within a large organization. What's that?
Yeah, the innovation sandbox is a really practical idea. It's basically a defined, safe space where innovation teams are allowed to conduct their experiments without jeopardizing the core business.
How does it work?
It could be defined in several ways. Maybe the team can only experiment on certain less critical product pages, or only with a specific opted-in customer segment, or maybe only within a particular geographic region initially. The key is that one cross-functional team has end-to-end ownership within that sandbox. They design the experiment, build the MVP, run the test, measure the results, all within the sandbox's boundaries. And importantly, experiments usually have a strict time limit.
So it contains the risk.
Exactly. It protects the parent organization and its existing customers from half-baked or potentially disruptive innovations until they're proven. And maybe just as importantly, it protects the innovation team from interference by managers in the core business who might feel threatened by the new idea and try to shut it down prematurely.
Sabotage prevented by structure.
Right. It creates a safe zone for rapid iteration and helps the team build those crucial startup muscles, experimenting, measuring, learning, pivoting within the larger corporate body.
So zooming out, what does all this mean for the future of management itself? It feels like Lean Startup isn't just a set of tools. It's proposing a pretty profound shift in how we think about organizing work and measuring progress.
It absolutely is. Ries argues that modern companies need to become adept at managing a portfolio of activities. On one hand, you need operational excellence in your existing scaled businesses that's about efficiency and sustaining innovation. But on the other hand, you also need a disciplined engine for disruptive innovation, for discovering and nurturing completely new sources of growth. It's not either, it's both.
And innovation isn't just a phase you go through at the beginning.
No, the idea is that innovation needs to be a continuous function. He even suggests that entrepreneur should become a legitimate job title and career path within large organizations. These internal entrepreneurs would be measured and rewarded based on innovation accounting, on the validated learning they generate, not just on short-term revenue from established products.
That's a radical shift in career paths and incentives.
It is, and it connects back to that core idea. In today's world, our productive capacity greatly exceeds our ability to know what to build. We can build almost anything.
So the crucial question shifts.
The crucial question is no longer, can we build it? It's, should it be built? Does anyone want it? Will it create sustainable value?
Because the biggest waste is.
The biggest waste comes from doing the wrong things efficiently on a massive industrial scale. Building products nobody wants, launching initiatives that don't solve real problems. This disciplined scientific approach to innovation, Ries argues, can give anyone from a startup founder to a manager in a large company to someone in government superpowers to identify their fundamental assumptions and test them rigorously before committing huge resources.
It's about building organizations that learn.
Exactly. Building learning organizations, not just production organizations, capable of adapting and thriving in a world of increasing uncertainty.
Wow. What a deep dive that was. We've really seen how the Lean Startup offers this powerful framework for navigating that extreme uncertainty. It emphasizes validated learning, that rapid experimentation through MVPs using actionable metrics, and having the courage to pivot when the data tells you to.
Yeah, it's all about building an organization that can learn faster than anyone else, and crucially, preventing that colossal waste of human potential, the time, the passion, the skill that comes from building things nobody ultimately values.
It really reframes the whole goal.
It does. And, in a world that feels like it's only getting more unpredictable, we often instinctively prioritize speed of execution, just doing things faster, being more efficient.
Right. Hustle culture, move fast and break things.
Exactly. But what if true speed, sustainable speed, comes not just from working faster, but from learning how to stop doing the things that shouldn't be done at all much, much sooner?
How might adopting that mindset, the discipline to stop, to learn, to pivot, how might that transform not just our businesses, but maybe our daily lives, or even our collective ability to tackle some of the world's really big, complex problems?
That is something to think about.